Welcome to another Politicrat Dispatch. Yours truly, Omar Moore here on another day in August of 2025. In fact, this particular day in August happens to be the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act becoming law. LBJ signed the bill into law on this very day, exactly 60 years ago. But he would never have signed that without Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., without Diane Nash, without Coretta Scott King, without Bayard Rustin and Diane Nash and Amelia Boynton and James Bevel and James Lawson and Ralph Abernathy and John Lewis and so many other people in the Black liberation struggle in the 1950s and 60s, Rosa Parks, so many other people. The day was a long time in coming, and it wasn't until March of 1965, after so many years of struggle for Black people in this country for voting rights and equal rights, that those pictures in March of 1965 of Bloody Sunday that rocked the world, John Lewis being beaten to within an inch of his life on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, a Klansman's bridge, because Edmund Pettus was a Klansman, and all the other black people who were beaten by white state troopers in Alabama, in Selma, Alabama, those shocking pictures, those violent images rocked the world, shocked the conscience of people across the world, and including here in the United States. And LBJ, who had told Dr. Martin Luther King, make me do it, make me sign a bill, make me do it. He got on TV, did LBJ, in March of 1965, and said that he was going to have legislation drafted and passed within a few weeks that gave black people voting rights in this country. Now, black women did not have voting rights until this act was signed exactly 60 years ago. Black men had had voting rights through Reconstruction. And in fact, in 1870, you had two black senators, both men, in the United States Senate, and several black men in the House of Representatives. This is in 1870, during the period of Reconstruction. And it's really important to understand that although LBJ signed the bill into law exactly 60 years ago today, he didn't do this out of the kindness of his heart. He certainly was a transformational president, don't get me wrong, but he did not sign the Voting Rights Act into law exactly 60 years ago today, August the 6th, 1965, because he was a nice guy, because he had an epiphany, because he woke up on the right side of bed. He signed the Voting Rights Act into law because black people across the land struggled, fought, and some died for voting rights for black people. The Voting Rights Act was also an enforcement mechanism to the 15th Amendment, which had been ratified in 1870 during Reconstruction. That amendment said that the right to vote cannot be abridged or denied anyone on the basis of race, color, or ethnicity. But in the Deep South and in other parts of the country, quite frankly, but in the Deep South, white people were violating that 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution every single day with poll taxes, violence, all kinds of heinous mechanisms to stop black people from voting. And so it took blood being shed, lives being taken, mostly black lives being taken, and one or two white lives being taken. Viola Louisa, for example, for LBJ to sit there and go, you know what? I really need to do this because this country won't survive. And it was Dr. King's persistence. It was Coretta Scott King's persistence. It was, as I say, James Bevel's persistence, James Orange. It was Diane Nash. It was Amelia Boynton. I can go on and on with the names. I've already listed some of these names before. And all of their hard work, their sacrifice, their dedication, the bombing of four little black girls in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963, September of that year. All of these things were massive turning points in the black liberation struggle in the 1950s and 60s. And really, it was that climate of violence which was preceded by the murder of Medgar Evers in his driveway just 2 or 3 months before the bombings of those four black little girls in Birmingham. And of course, the violence that came after that in 1965, and of course in 1963 as well, because just 2 months after the bombing of four little girls, you saw the assassination of JFK. In 65, you saw the assassination of Malcolm X. In 64, you saw the assassinations, the murders of three civil rights workers, two of them Jewish, one of them black. You saw in 1968 the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and RFK. So all of these things happen in this climate of violence. And in 1964, you had the Civil Rights Act passed. And in 1965, exactly 60 years ago today, you have the Voting Rights Act signed into law by LBJ. And he gave one of the most, I think, one of the most important speeches he gave during his presidency. And the signing ceremony featured Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and a number of other Black leaders in the liberation struggle, and numerous dignitaries and politicians on the Republican and Democratic sides of the aisle. And I have the latest episode of the Politicrat now available on Apple and Spotify. There is a link to it in the description notes in this video where I talk about the Voting Rights Act, the history that led up to it, what happened in the House and the Senate, what happened, of course, on the activism front, and also what happened, of course, before that bill, leading up to it, 100 years before that bill was signed into law on this date 60 years ago, and also where we are today. So please listen to that episode of The Politicrat. Very important episode. I urge you to listen to it. And also, finally, there is finally at long last the sequel to a story that I wrote on Substack just a few weeks ago. The first story I wrote, of course, is the one you probably have read. I'll put a link to it in the description of this video. And that would be the restaurants, a short list of restaurants, a partial list of restaurants in San Francisco that welcome Black people, that make Black people feel welcome. So if you ever travel to San Francisco, or if you live in San Francisco and you're Black, or if you live in San Francisco and you're not Black, I urge you to go to the restaurants that I recommended in my July 22nd, 2025 story that I wrote. The news story that I wrote that was released today on August 6th was about a partial list of restaurants in San Francisco that do not welcome Black people, that are racist and that are hostile to Black people. And I can tell you that from personal experience. And so I wrote about those today, and that story is also linked in the description notes of this very video. Yeah, I really tell you about some of the experiences that I had in those restaurants. They were not pretty, as you will read if you do read, as you find out if you do read the second story that came out today on the partial list of restaurants that do not welcome Black people here in San Francisco. Yeah, these San Francisco restaurants, some of them are a real trip, believe me on that. So, look, please subscribe to more, Mooreo .substack.com. And of course, the Politicrat Substack is politicrat.substack.com. And I'll be back with another episode of the Politicrat again very soon. You can find the Politicrat podcast on Apple, Spotify, and numerous podcasting platforms. Please listen to the episode of August 6th, 2025, which is linked here in this description notes on the Voting Rights Act 60 years ago today. Take care and be well.